the next and final step of the held model is called evaluation. So once we have facilitated our online course and get to the final weeks, it is important to take the time to evaluate and reflect on the whole course unit, whether we were able to achieve our learning outcomes, whether students achieve their learning outcomes as well. And for this, we can do various activities. So just as I mentioned right now, you could engage in the process of self-reflection on the course unit. You could also ask students for feedback. And this is usually done at the University of Manchester through unit surveys. Student feedback is important because it does tell us as tutors what went well, what didn't do so well, and what else can we do to improve the unit for next time. And also, as part of our course unit, we think about different types of assessment, which become tools for us to then reflect back on the overall course unit. So for instance, as part of your own storyboarding process, you were asked to think about how you would make sure that students learned in that specific session. And this is when we are talking not about evaluating the whole course unit, but evaluating the learning process. So we get into ideas around formative and summative assessments, which we are encouraged to involve in our online course unit. So for instance, if you click on that link I just sent, you will see then that this new set of slides talks about the difference between assessment and testing to get you thinking about how you as a tutor would evaluate the learning process. And we know then that assessment is a more inclusive term and refers to the notion of keeping track of students' progress, whereas testing is a type of assessment and usually refers to a tool or an instrument that is designed to see if students have achieved what those specific learning outcomes for that specific session were achieved. But there are also different types of assessment. We have formative assessment and summative assessment, where formative assessment is carried out by the class teacher as part of the routine of the process of teaching and learning, and it is specifically related to what has been taught about the information from that assessment. That information will tell us where students are at in the learning process, what it is that they might need more of in terms of support in the learning process, what things they are now mastering, what things they need to learn and spend more time on. Whereas then the summative assessment is not necessarily prepared and carried out by the class teacher, does not necessarily relate or is closely related to everything that has been taught. The learning performance results are used then, whatever that information of that summative assessment is used for administrative purposes, like checking standards and targets. And it is frequently imposed by the institution or the Ministry of Education, and they have to be carried out because they measure in a way, that final outcome or learning outcomes if they were achieved. So if we think about your experiences in this university, formative assessment would be the collaboration that you do with other people, your individual work that you do, the feedback you get from tutors, from other classmates. that could be informal. It does not necessarily affect your grade. And that's what we are doing as, part of this second set of sessions in this unit, where you're asked to work collaboratively to design an online course. You learn from each other, you give each other feedback, you develop materials, you develop an outline, and you get our feedback as tutors. And that's formative assessment. So it's not counting towards your final mark, but it is helping you through the process of teaching and learning so that you can get experience, so that you can engage with the more practical bits of online course design after, having prepared and read a lot of theory. And as an example of a summative assessment, now, well, in this unit, we have two different tools. One is your collaborative assignment that you submit first around, April. And the second part of the assessment that is summative, and, these summative assessments do count towards your final grade. That part two is your reflective piece. That is another written assignment. So if you think back or reflect on your course unit outline that you're designing, overall for the course unit, what kind of summative assessment are you thinking about to implement? If this is something that the institution where your online course is going to be delivered, if the institution is asking you to tell them what summative assessment you're going to incorporate, what would this be? And in the same way, think about different types of formative assessment that you can carry out throughout the different sessions, the different modules that you're going to be teaching. Is it going to be peer observation, of teaching observation, group work, peer feedback, tutor feedback, poster presentations? So what are you using? What would you use? And usually formative assessment is something that we implement throughout the different sessions that we teach. And sometimes it might look like, right, so that's the end of the session. What did we learn today? Just by, an open-ended question by asking students, what did you learn today? Did you enjoy the session? And that's it, just to see where students are at in the learning process. And that's it. So we have some further references which you can also access through Canvas. In Canvas, we also have, well, I'm going to go back to the next slide of the presentation, where, if you remember, we were saying, you could think about different types of activities here in this slide to then reflect and evaluate your online course design. So we talked about self-reflection, student feedback, and those different types of assessment that you involve in your unit. Self-reflection questions that you can ask to evaluate the course that you are designing. So could be something like, did my students enjoy the unit? Were there sufficient activities to engage with students throughout the course unit? Which aspects of the unit were the most successful and which were the least successful? Did you manage to achieve the learning outcomes, and what evidence do you have for this? That, in terms of evidence, is where we are talking about probably about those surveys, those types of summative assessment that, as we've seen, having a summative assessment or different types of formative assessment can also inform what you do, how you teach, what you change in your online course unit. So what challenges, affordances did you notice from your course unit, and will you teach it in the same way for next time? Now, this is, you can see, I was not reading, word by word these questions. But there's more information about in Richards and Farrell on this type of reflective questions. I'm borrowing this from a unit I also teach in the TESOL program. So basically, Richards and Farrell are language teachers, but they also say, these questions could help us to think about our course unit at the end of the day. There's more information about assessment in online course design. I covered some aspects of it through the slides, the different set of slides that I showed you. So basically, this information is also in Canvas if you want to go into the nitty-gritty. This page, for instance, tells us, what the purpose of the assessment, formative and summative, are. And also reminds us that this is a moment where we go back to, the learning outcomes that we designed to check whether they were achieved, and to check, whether the students were able to engage in the different higher order or lower order skills that we have incorporated as part of our learning outcomes. More useful resources that you can explore are on Canvas and here as well in this slide. So please take the time to do a bit of exploration in your own time. And that's it for today's session. Thank you for listening to me, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.